I'm Hazel Eilert, I'm the Council Scrutiny Manager.
Robert McGowan, Policy and Scrutiny Officer.
Councillor Maureen Powell, Councillor for Castle Ward and Abergavenny and a member of the committee.
Morning, Councillor Roger Harris, Cressolon Ward, Abergavenny and member of this committee.
Tony Crowhurst, representing the Disability Advice Project.
Chris Bowie, representing Mind Monmouthshire.
Martin Groker, the elected member for Lansdowne Ward in Abergavenny, and I'm a member of the committee.
Sheila Woodhouse, member for Grofield Ward in Abergavenny and member of this committee.
County Councillor Lisa Dimmock for the Elms Endy and member of this committee.
Paul Pavey, elected member for Larkfield and Chepstow and a member of this committee.
Good morning everyone. County Councillor Ruth Edwards, elected member for Lintilio Casseni and also a member of this committee.
Councillor Phil Murphy, member for Cowent and Cabinet member for Resources.
Tyrone Stokes, Finance Manager for Social Care and Health.
So welcome everybody, and I'm delighted to say that we are joined by a new scrutiny officer, and we are delighted to welcome Tony Crowhurst and Chris Bowie as our two of our new co-opted members of this committee, and I'm sure that they will bring lots of information and different points of view to our discussions. Do we have any apologies for absence? No apologies for absence. Are there any declarations of interest in items on the agenda? Councillor Pavia.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, I'm an officer. I'm a research and policy lead for ADSS Cymru. Thank you.
I'm going to declare an interest because although we're not making any decisions as such today, there are a number of references to an Aneurin Bevan University Health Board in the meeting pack, and so just for probity, I'll declare that I am currently a member of an Aneurin Bevan University Health Board. We have no items for the public open forum, and so can I move us to item 4, which is the scrutiny of how the council is utilising disabled facilities grants, developing an effective interface between housing and social care to achieve critical outcomes for service users. I'm advised that the officers who are leading that item are on their way to us. So shall we take the minutes, members? Can I take you to the minutes of our meeting held on the 5th of November? If everyone's got those in front of you, could I ask you to note for any points of accuracy on page 1, page 2. Oh, Councillor Grocott.
I know it's some time ago now, but I am sure that I sent in my apologies for non-attendance and they're not recorded. If they could simply be my name added to apologies.
Of course, Councillor Grocott. So we will add your apologies. Apologies for that. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, and page 8. Are there any other items of accuracy on those minutes then, members? No? Then can I ask that we accept them as a true record? Thank you, members. We shall let the officers settle themselves. Is it yourself, Ian, who's leading this particular report? Yes, Ian and right. Okay, okay. So item 4 then. We've just introduced the item for the benefit of the live stream. So if you wouldn't mind just taking us through some of the key points that you can assume that we've all read the report, but some of the key items that you would like us to note in particular. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. Yeah, this is essentially a performance report in relation to disabled adaptations, but it is essentially focused on disabled facilities grants. Simplistically, we provide two core grants, which is the mandatory disabled facilities grant and a minor adaptation programme, like small handrails, half steps, which is delivered on our behalf by Care and Repair. Our focus as a team, as a service, is particularly around turning around disabled facilities grants as quickly as possible. That's a statutory performance indicator, and obviously one that comes to your attention in the suite that the local authority monitors, and we've tried to really just highlight within this, obviously, that's of key relevance to us. That continues to be I'll say an okay position. It's a marginally improving position from our perspective. We're working towards a target of 180 days, and we're still above that, unfortunately, of 187 days. But the trend is down around that. What I would like to say, though, is probably most of the time, I think, apart from the last time I think we came to committee with a performance report, it was under the responsibility of John Parfitt. We've now got Sarah as a new manager, and I think what that has given us is a set of fresh eyes, essentially. And as I sit here, probably sticking my neck out a little bit, but Sarah and I are pretty confident that there are opportunities to continue to improve our turnaround. So we do believe that we can continue to improve that. So that's Sarah's particular focus at the moment, really trying to dig underneath, where we have got delays, and essentially how we can be smarter in that regards. I won't go into too much detail around that, but it's quite low level. It's quite low level stuff. So it's not. So I don't think we've got one single magic bullet. But I think if we can, if you like, corral all these smaller areas, we do believe that we can, we can turn in a far quicker time. So, and again, might be something that we could talk to you about at perhaps sometime next year. So I think the only other thing really to say was that our demand has largely continued. We're not seeing any exceptions in relation to our disabled facilities grants. We did see a bit of a dip in referrals at the beginning of the year. So if you'd asked me 3-4 months ago, we'd have probably been reporting that we thought we were going to have quite a relatively low year. but that has really picked up towards the end of last year. Again, not sure what the reason is, but that has put us back on a bit of a level playing field with previous years. So our demand is as is. An area that has increased quite significantly is safety at home, minor adaptations. Again, we're not 100% sure exactly the reason for those adaptations. For that spike, but we do know that Care and Repair, who administer this for us, have had a cut from Welsh Government for their minor adaptation programme called RAP, Rapid Response Adaptation Programme. So we're making a bit of an assumption that the two are slightly interrelated, which has resulted in us having this additional spike in demand. Whether that will continue next year, I don't know. But Care and Repair have asked us for additional funding in relation to safety at home, and we've obviously been in a good position to provide that. And you'll probably recall from a few years ago when when the budget was 600,000, Care and Repair found themselves in a place where they were needing to actually ration the safety at home funding. So I think that's a good news position, certainly from Care and Repair. Certainly from social services perspective, because we know how important that those minor adaptations are to the frontline staff. So I don't think there's anything else particularly.
No, just like to add that since I've been in post, I've improved the relationship significantly with Care and Repair to the point where we put in a joint application for ICF funding. So Ian refers to the £10,000 less RAP funding they had, but we were able next year to get about approximately £8,500 worth of funding for Monmouthshire. So it's a different funding stream, but it will be able to provide quicker access to ramping, which we know is very important to the applicant to be able to get in and out of the property safely, as well as adapting the property. So the relationship continues. I've looked at some work with contractors that are both used with us and Care and Repair to see what the synergy is to build our level of contractors and Care and Repairs. We've taken all of these contractors through DBS training to improve our offer to the applicant, to make sure that we know the contractors and to make sure that it's somebody we would want in our own property. So it's just about strengthening our offer and making sure, as Ian said, that we try and reduce that timescale where possible, but with an eye on the fact that we want quality contractors to go in and actually do the work on a way that we would want that work completed. So although the focus is on that timescale, it's more on about doing that work as well and as quality as we can within that timescale. And as I said, we are confident we can get that down with just a few minor changes.
Can I just add one other thing? I've put some case studies at the back, which have been kindly provided by Eve, because we work very closely with Eve's OTs. Subsequent to the report, Eve has provided a little bit more information around the cost benefits. That's not in the report, but I've got some hard copies which essentially gives an extra paragraph about those cost benefits, which may or may not be useful to you. So you're okay for me to just distribute those?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ian. I think that's really helpful, actually. Thank you very much for that addition. It's something that we did mention as something which could be valuable for members to see. Can I open up the discussion for members? We've had a little bit of a pre-discussion about disabled facilities grants. Which member would like to kick us off?
Sarah, could you turn Ian's microphone off, please? Thank you.
Roger?
Thank you, Chair. Clarification, please, if that is possible. I noticed in the report that it states that the DFG is going down from 900,000 to 600,000 in the medium-term financial plan. Is that, in actual fact, the case, for a start?
I'm aware that's a conversation that that Cabinet have raised. We've been asked to provide evidence around that and whether that's possible or not. I personally am of the view that the additional funding that we had 2 or 3 years ago made a massive difference. We ran with a backlog for every year, and ever since we've had that funding, we've not had a backlog, and we've not had to ration safety at home. So on the basis of the current demand, it makes me wonder if we would go back to having a backlog if that was needed.
Thank you, Chair. I would be concerned if that was the case. We aren't achieving fully the fact that all these grants should be completed within 6 months, so we're not hitting the target there, and to think about cutting back when we're not even achieving a target, to my mind, is it's just incomprehensible. The other thing is, if we look at the expenditure to date, 845,000 odd, pending DFGs awaiting approval, 155,000. That's £1 million. We're getting 900,000, and I know we had a bit of extra last year. The figures are proof enough that we need at least the £900,000, and I would be deeply concerned, and I hope the committee would be, if the Cabinet decide that it should go down to £600,000. And maybe we could point that out to them. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. Councillor Murphy.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The 600,000 is the amount in the base budget and has been for quite some time. And yes, Cabinet did decide in the 17-18 and 18-19 and 19-20 to put the extra 300,000 in to clear the backlog. When we reviewed the capital budget proposals for the coming year, we did ask Ian and his team for a progress report as to how that had alleviated the situation, and clearly we've got that now. So next time we get together, we'll consider that report and decide whether or not we're going to see if we can extend it to the 900 again. It's a case of reviewing the capital budget and seeing what scope we've got there. But this is what we wanted to enable us to make that decision.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for coming. I wonder if you could help me really with an issue around protocols, because I was approached by a resident in my ward. And my ward is largely built on the side of a mountain. So as you walk through my ward, you get nearer to heaven. But it means that to gain access to front doors, very often you're walking up quite a flight of stairs from the pavement. The particular person who contacted me is now 86 and lives on her own and is fiercely independent, and would never dream of going to the doctor unless she was at death's door. But she did ask me if it would be possible to have a handrail to help her up the steps. So I rang Adult Social Care and was told to ring Mardy Park. I rang Mardy Park and was immediately asked for quite a few medical details that really it would have been inappropriate for me to know anyway. There was then a rather snide remark about county councillors trying to jump queues, which I felt terrible about. You know, it certainly wasn't what I was trying to do. And then for months and months, I'm talking about a year probably now, if not longer, nothing has happened. Now, I just like a guidance on whether I'd overstepped the mark, but it seems to me that as an elected representative, if people in my ward bring me an issue around mobility like that, it's entirely reasonable for me to pass that on, and I would then hope for something to happen. But have I overstepped the mark, or should I go back and revisit that?
No, I don't believe you have. As some of you may be aware, I also manage a care line service, and we do have people, friends and family, referring into that service on the applicant's behalf. They tend to be elderly and vulnerable and not able to have those conversations. And I myself have rang social services duty, like you, when I've come across something that I believe needs that assessment. I need to look into that, and obviously it's timely because I've got a meeting in Monavale with some OTs this afternoon, so I will raise that, because that sounds like a very simple adaptation, rail safety at home, and one that we would hope we could actually expedite very quickly. It probably could be done with a trusted assessor from Care and Repair. I don't see the need for something very minor to require an OT assessment, so I'm concerned about the timescales, but obviously sometimes some things do go wrong for all the right reasons in the world. So if you want to give me the details, I'll certainly look into that. But no, I would encourage anybody to ring social services duty and refer on the basis of keeping people safe and empowered within their own homes.
I've got Councillor Edwards, Councillor Brown and Councillor Dimmock, and then Tony. Just one point. I think it would be really helpful. I don't know if you can send it out to all elected members, but to have a little bit of information about Care and Repair and Safety at Home and Disabled Facilities Grant, so that if in their ward they do come across a person that may benefit, we are aware of the referral route to be able to either pass that to the individual or to call up and make a referral if that's what they are requesting that we do. Thank you. And some information on Careline I think would be really helpful, perhaps for elected members too. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Sarah. Morning, Ian. Following on from Councillor Grocott, if that lady's fallen on the steps, what happens then? She's in hospital laid up for a very long time, especially of the age that she is. And I think we're forever being told that Monmouthshire has got an ageing population. And then if they haven't got the facilities at home, a lot of people haven't got family connections in the county because a lot come here to retire. And to have these facilities enables them, as we all encourage them, to stay in their own home. But if we haven't got that in their own home and the facilities, it means sometimes, like this lady, she could be characterised as a bed blocker if she can't be moved back into her own home with care in the community. So it's always a knock-on effect with all of these things. So I think to cut back on any other funding for this is, a very bad step for all of the county, not just for the individuals that are caught up in that sort of thing, but we as a county should be thinking more of the circumstances that we are faced with in this county.
I was pleased to note that the target figures for DFG have gone, have improved in terms of down to 187 rather than before. I think the statutory duty is 180 because it's that's my working out of 6 months. I'm not sure about the safety at home, whether or not there's any time limit on that, because it mentions that they often facilitate hospital discharge or reduce the risk of falls and injuries. Now, I'm just wondering about the situation. I mean, obviously, people are in hospital and they need adaptations to their property before they're discharged. And what liaison do you have with ward discharge officers and occupational therapists based in the hospital in terms of what they deal with? And also in relation to care homes. I mean, private care homes are about, if you pay privately, it's about £1,000 a week. Now, if presumably these grants are available to everybody as opposed to means tested, is that right? Or are they? Yeah, but is DFG, is that means tested? I don't know. And I think the other question is if somebody wanted to, you know, obviously one of the difficulties on a private basis would be who to access that's got the proper approval to make sure that they, you know, do you have sort of an approved list that people can use through care and repair and that sort of thing? Because I was just wondering, but I also was thinking about the fact that in a sense this is causing bed blocking not only in hospitals but care homes as well. And I mean, is the Health Board able to provide any funding for this? Because obviously we've got the situation where local government is vastly underfunded, and the Health Board is getting more funding now than they had done before. And in fact, you know, I did hear that in one particular hospital, a high proportion of the beds are being taken up by the fact that people don't have the social care adaptations, and that has a knock-on effect for the costs for healthcare. So there is a good reason for the Health Board to actually facilitate this sort of thing, and you know, it seems sensible to do so. And the bed blocking actually then results in sort of like 9-hour ambulance waits on New Year's Eve to get in, because the A&E can't discharge to other wards because there's no beds available, and so the whole cycle goes on. So I think there's a very good argument to, you know, certainly on safety at home and so forth, to actually try and get some funding from the Health Board to help this, because it's going to help them in the long run anyway.
To answer some of those points, if somebody is in a hospital bed and requires an adaptation, it's a very easy access route to care and repair to raise a request for either a rapid response grant that is provided by Welsh Government that we touched on earlier, or a safety at home grant. So there shouldn't be any delay with somebody not being able to come out of hospital for a minor adaptation like a handrail, half step, etc. And we are able to signpost these people directly to care and repair on either the basis of applying for a safety at home wrap, or in the question of going to them privately if they don't want to go through that process. Certainly we will help them with regards to what contractors we use that we know that are DBS checked and provide that quality service, and care and repair will do the same thing. So there is that sort of wraparound service. With regards to health funding, to be fair, I think Health are starting to realise, and Welsh Government, that there is a need. There is a need for more joined up thinking. There is a need for us to work as a local authority and Health. And just touching on Careline, they did fund it significantly regionally last year to the tune of 400,000 for capital equipment. So although they've reduced the rapid response budget last year, they have then provided ICF funding for ramping. So you sort of gain on the swings and lose on the roundabouts. But it's definitely an improving relationship that we have with Health. I sit on an ICF group from a telecare perspective, so certainly if anything comes up regarding capital adaptations, I'm there with my hand in the air going, what about X, Y and Z? And there is that drive to work together with us more. So it is an improving position, I believe.
Thank you. Councillor Dimmock and Tony.
Thank you. Can I thank the Chair for arranging that contact list, because I'm sure many of us will find that really useful. I've got 2 questions. Obviously, you've reduced the number of days it takes, but can I ask what actually takes the time? Is it the processing of the application, or is it actually sourcing the contractors? And secondly, you said, what was it, 31 applicants have provided a 97% satisfaction rate. How are we actually receiving those feedbacks? And is it the caregiver or the care receiver who is completing them?
Okay, first point, I'll touch on the customer satisfaction, it's easier. We offer everybody a customer satisfaction survey. We have gone into the process of actually leaving that from a final visit from a surveyor, so the applicant has time to read it and it's a free post envelope to respond. I do a very similar thing with Careline. If we then don't get that response from the applicant, and bearing in mind the circumstances, some of them are going to find that very difficult to respond to, we would contact the applicant by telephone. Generally, the customer satisfaction for adaptations is extremely high. Their only issue is normally regarding perhaps the length of time the process has taken. They're very happy with the contractor. They're very happy with the outcomes. I don't think I've yet to hear anybody that said it hasn't made their lives better and more independent, particularly around Sharon, as you can imagine. With regards to the time scale, we're in this weird paradox of a world where we have an 180-day time scale, but there is legislation to allow the applicant to delay that grant by up to a year should they want to. So some of the legislation jars against each other. I mean, it's rare that the applicant will take a year, but we have actually got 2 cases at the moment where they've gone to live with family, and they're obviously pushing up the mean average considerably because we're on sort of 250 days. Where the process takes up to that sort of 187 days, it's really sort of built across the process. There's the initial point where the OT needs to make that assessment of the individual. There isn't a massive delay with the OTs. We have a very good working relationship with OTs in Monmouthshire. But to be fair, there is that delay. You know, you're talking 2 or 3 weeks maybe to get the OT out to do that thorough assessment. Then you're talking about us dealing with the applicant, asking them for some financial information to make sure we're putting them through the right process. And there is a degree of posting information out. We do it as quickly as we can and we chase it, but there is that time scale. Then there is the time scale of sending out the grant surveyor. We have 0.6 of a grant surveyor. He works 3 days a week. Again, he works as expediently and as thoroughly as he can over the area, but you can imagine Monmouthshire, it's a difficult area to cover. We then have the scenario where we have contractors to build in. We haven't got a massive issue with contractor delays, but to be fair, certain times of the year, it's more difficult to build that programme in. And then you've obviously got the applicant agreeing to having that worked in that time scale. So you can see it. There isn't any, I've studied the process, there isn't anything standing out to say, if we change that, it would make a massive difference. Where I think, Ian and I agree, it's about looking at it and shaving perhaps 1 or 2 days across the piece. I think that's where we will reduce that time scale of possibly 7 to 10 days. There isn't a magic bullet in all this, there really isn't. But it is about looking, you know, we've done some work with contractors. We've got very good contractors. They can turn a level access shower around in 5 days. It's really good for the applicant. But it's about, you know, it's a measured approach across that, isn't it? What I don't want to do, and I don't think any of you would, is to have that 170, 180 days as the target that means everything, and then and not consider the applicant in it and not consider the, you know, the quality of the work that we're trying to achieve in all this. That's my personal opinion. I want that 180 days, but it's not at no cost. You know, it's about the person in this is the vulnerable person. We need to remember that. We really do. I think sometimes we can lose sight of the individual in all this. So.
Good morning. You mentioned OTs just now. When we did a Freedom of Information Act request some years ago, the logjam in the whole system appeared to be the OTs. In your report, you mention main reason for delays are internal processing, which includes OTs. Can you put some flesh on the bones and say how you're intending to improve that position?
As I said, I believe we have a very good relationship with OTs. When I took on this role, I went to 3 other authorities within Wales to see what they were doing. I'm a firm believer of looking at what everyone else is doing to see if we can use it or improve it. And some of them had extremely long waiting lists from an OT perspective, and we generally do not have that. We really don't. There may be the odd delay with regards to if it's a very, very complex adaptation, particularly children's. The OT really wants the input of the surveyor to come along and say, well, that's actually what I believe is better for the applicant, but is that structurally, feasibly possible? Well, we go back to if we've got 0.6 of a surveyor that works Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and you might have a part-time OT that's dedicated to that individual, there might be a bit of a delay. Unfortunately, you need to suck that delay up because that's still better than the applicant to make sure that what we're actually assessing for and trying to put a programme of works is the right thing to do. I'd rather do that and take a little bit of a delay and get it right than rush in and not do that properly. So the reality is there's always going to be a little bit of a delay because of the availability of personnel our end. You know, we're running a service on a 0.6 of an admin and a 0.6 of a surveyor and achieving all that work over the year. I think we're doing really, really well.
Can I just give some small examples of like the sort of processes we're talking about? And this is this one say that they are quite low level. So at the moment we've got a process where that the DFGs need to be signed off by two managers, by two cost centre managers. There's four managers in the team, but obviously we're out and about. So there are times when an approval will be waiting for certainly a second manager. Now what we need to, that was something that that was introduced through audit, and we're questioning that. Do we need to have two signatures? We've identified, we picked up that information was being routinely sent out in the post. We know now there are some people that are able to deal with emails. We weren't. We could be. Sarah and I feel we can be even more proactive when we don't get paperwork back. So we've got staff out in the sticks. Just go and knock on the door and say, how are you doing with your paperwork? We've also introduced a process whereby we now try and pin contractors down with start dates. So hopefully when we get a start date, we've then got something to go back to a contractor and say, you said you were going to start on the 1st of June, it's now the 5th of June, is everything all right? So that's what we mean by really small things. So it's not going to be a magic bullet, but Sarah and I are pretty confident that if we can get those operating routinely, we will be able to shave time off. But just to give you a feel of how fragile the staffing is at the moment, our surveyor, as Sarah says, is 0.6. He's got to have an operation in February, so we expect him to be off work for at least a month, 6 weeks perhaps. So suddenly we will be left without a surveyor until he comes back. Now we're gonna suss that out at the beginning, or just before he goes off, to try and mitigate against that. And to be fair to the surveyor, he's actually offered to come in a bit of time before he goes off. But it just shows how thinly spread we are in relation to staffing, and I know with the smallest team in Wales. So and I do know our turnaround is, I don't know where we are in relation to the rest of Wales at this point, but generally we've been in the top end. So I think we do quite well. And just to go back to the OT turnaround, if I remember rightly, the average OT turnaround for last year, I think it was 11 days. I can confirm that, but it's good. And again, and we know from other local authorities, it is a completely different ball game. We don't have the problems that some local authorities certainly have had in the past.
Well, thank you, member. Oh, sorry, Councillor Fear. I'm gonna sum up then after that, because we've got to get on to the budget, because I do know that Councillor Murphy needs to leave.
Thanks, Chair. Just a quick question, really. You said about the ICF funding. Is that 1 year or 2 year?
It was capital funding, Paul, that we've got an amount of money to spend over the next 2 years, and it's designed for ramping, so it's quite specific because it's low-level external adaptation. So it's a one-off funding stream, but we all know in this room, once you've applied for one level of ICF, there's always a little bit of ICF you can apply for. So we've just got that eye on, has this worked? Was it helpful? And if so, we'll apply again if we're able to.
I'm just going to say that the whole idea of ICF really is about catalyst for change and ensuring new models and new approaches. If it does work, I just wonder what the expectation is to mainstream that, you know, you've got a budget gap, you've managed to fill it for potentially, you know, a couple of years. What's the expectation then on mainstreaming that? Because that was one of the big issues that Wales Audit Office picked up in its report, and it's obviously its regional report. You know, there's not enough mainstreaming of ICF projects.
The ICF that we've been able to access with Care and Repair is about using a different contractor for ramping. So it's even more deployable than the current ramping system we use, where we can take away, it's called easy access, so it's metal based as opposed to the material used in this ramping. So it should be very easy for us to quickly adapt and take away and reuse. And that's what we're looking at in this project. Is there a need to have these different ramping sources that we can adapt mobile homes, etc., that have always been traditionally quite hard to adapt? So it's worth looking at this ramping. We've never used it before, make sure it is actually fit for purpose. But yeah, it's allowing us to do the adaptations in a different way. So going forward, if it was successful, that's probably what we would be looking to do, yeah.
Thank you. Can I thank members for their questions and officers for the report? I think it's really helpful to note the detail that's contained in the case studies. I think that gives members a really good insight as to the impact that can have, you know, on people's well-being and lives. We note the improvements in time and, you know, your assessment of how you are trying to further improve that, but that recognising that the most important thing, I noted from your report that you said that one of the most important things is that improved relationships with people undergoing the adaptations and also with contractors. So that's also really we're really pleased to read that. However, I think I note that, and I would absolutely agree with Councillor Harris's point, that the projection in the medium-term financial plan to return to 600,000 as per the base budget is a significant concern for this committee, I think. And we would certainly recommend to the Cabinet member and Cabinet that they reassess that in line with the demand and the detail that that you've been able to provide in this report. Can I further thank Eve for providing us with some detail about the impact that having a disabled facilities grant can have in terms of other costs that might have been incurred should that person not have had the grant and had to be rehoused, or other things which may, in terms of cost terms, would be an issue, but equally in terms of that person's well-being and proximity to where they prefer to be. There are lots of potential concerns. So the Cabinet member is here, so perhaps we don't need to formally write to him as we would normally, but perhaps we should put a note together to say that this was the committee's view. Are you content with that, members, that we note our concern about the potential for a reduction, and that we would be minded to ask Cabinet to consider retaining the £900,000 that's currently committed to DFGs in the medium term? Councillor Fear.
Sorry, Chair, I just remembered one thing. I know Welsh Government are about to embark on a piece of research work to look at DFG across Wales, and I know they're looking for people to interview. So if any of the social care team or you guys are interested, then with another hat on, I can facilitate that. So.
Thank you, Councillor Pavia. I think that's really helpful, because I think, this is perhaps something that we don't talk, I know we've talked about at Main Council quite a bit and the additional monies, but seeing the impact on people, I think is really the most important thing, and we've been able to do that probably for the first time. So that concludes what I wanted to say. Councillor Brown.
Thank you. It's just an added point that I think Councillor Edwards brought up, which was about the idea that there should be some liaison with your department and the planning department, the LDP, in terms of how they actually build houses in the first place, and so that some things like I think you were saying about showers and various other things are on the ground floor and there's more flexible accommodation when it's built in the first place, you know, because obviously stair lifts and things like that are fairly commonplace in any event, and you know, having an adaptable type of dwelling, I mean, maybe registered social landlords as well, as private people, but perhaps it's something we could make as an extra recommendation, if that's fair. I think Councillor Edwards wants to say something.
Just to clarify, we've discussed this before, and the Economy and Development Committee in particular we've been advised looking at how the LDP process supports the idea of lifetime homes, so that are suitable for now and the future. And so we haven't specifically focused on that because we don't want to muddy the waters, but I think it's a good and useful point and something that we can all bear in mind in our planning machinations. Councillor Edwards, did you want to say?
You know, just to say, we do tend to think of homes for life, you know, the lifetime, or something. I mean, even just the steps, as Councillor Grocott said, even something like that. I mean, I've got bungalows in my ward that are only for over 55s, and they've all got steps up to them. And not only is it ridiculous for elderly people, but it's ridiculous as well for even if it was young people there with pushchairs and things like that. I mean, I think in the planning process, I think we should look at more detail, not just of the windows and the roofs and things like that, but the accessibility of some of the properties and the width of doors and all those sorts of things. And if those were implemented as part of our policy and planning, I think we would win-win then as far as the demands then on social adaptations and all those sort of things wouldn't be so onerous then to be paid for if they were already there and easily adapted.
And absolutely, I'm sure that we would all be pleased to see planning and planning policy applying, you know, future generations policy and equalities policy more robustly. And we would certainly welcome that, I think, in the Adult Select Committee. So thank you, members. Thank you very much for that. And we move to, that concludes this item, I think. Thank you. And I think we would like to move on to item 5, which is the reporting of adult social services performance for 2019-20. Thank you very much. We'll just let these officers change over. Richard. Good morning. Is it predominantly Richard and Sean that are going to be presenting this with detail from potentially from Eve and Julie if necessary? So I mean, assume that we have read your report, but please could, if there are key points that you wish to point out or highlight or for us to note, then we'd be pleased to hear that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a Q2 performance roundup for adult services, which is largely based on the statutory performance framework. The report includes the most recent benchmarking data available, which is from last year, which was published at Wales level and with quartiles as well. And as with the Director's report, we've added any additional local context where relevant. This year, Welsh Government have removed the requirement for us to complete qualitative returns, which are questionnaires. But we locally have decided to continue with the adults questionnaire. Welsh Government are also consulting on changes to the performance framework, which will take effect from next year. Alongside these changes, we will continue to develop locally how we assess our performance through the Director's report. So that's the background of the report. I was planning then to hand over to Eve to talk through the service perspective.
Thank you, Sian. Yeah, as Sian said, there's been a lot of changes about what's been expected of us from a performance perspective. From a service perspective, we've been doing a lot around the qualitative stuff as opposed to just the quantitative stuff. I mean, we obviously collect all the information around, you know, how many people we see, how many are independent after reablement, detox, etc., etc. But we've also had quite a big focus, I think, from two perspectives, really. One is we're having a big focus at the moment on how we ensure that the health and well-being of our workforce is paramount. So we're looking at developing questionnaires, etc., around that, with a view to, if staff feel supported and empowered at work, then the service that they provide and deliver to the people of Monmouthshire will therefore be a good service and improve. We, as you know, we've been working a lot on having a very person-centred approach to care, and that has continued. We look now at personal outcomes as being one of the key indicators for whether or not somebody is living the life that they want to lead. So there's an expectation that all staff, when they do assessments or interventions with people, will be focusing on what's important to that person and whether they've achieved those goals. We do also, interestingly from the previous conversation around DFGs and turnaround, we do also collect information around our response times, which I think is very important. As we've developed our FISH system in adults, and then we have duty in older adult mental health, we very much look at the responses that we gave to people, those people that we were able to just give advice and information to, who were then able to go and resolve their own problems. People that we were able to signpost to some of the frog spawn, as most of you will know. But also, you know, we look at, when work comes in, we look at the urgency of that work. So, you know, we almost rag rate work. So there isn't a standard as to when we would respond to somebody. The response will be very much dependent on the individual circumstances. There are many occasions, I was in Monavale yesterday, and the staff who were in the fishbowl were going out to people that day who had just knocked at our front door and needed a response there and then. Other people will have the conversation with that they don't need a response there and then, and they're quite happy to wait, you know, a few days or whatever. So we do a lot of work on gathering information around those sorts of areas, so around response, what our intervention is, how people are after we've been involved with them, and like I say, a focus on people's health and well-being as well. I'll touch on detox because that's always contentious figure. I think the detox situation has showed some improvements over the last few months, although I wouldn't say that any of them are particularly significant. Interestingly, we've just been asked to collate something for Welsh Government around what our understandings around some of the problems around detox are. I think that's been very welcome from a lot of the local authorities, and we've been working on something locally but also regionally, because I think there's this, I wouldn't say it's a myth, but I think it's sometimes all attributed to inability to get a social care package, when in actual fact when you look at the details of that, which we do on a regularly, feels like hourly basis sometimes, that isn't actually always the case. And when you look at the detail, a lot of it is actually around complexity. You know, the complexity of the people that we're supporting and managing now is very different to what it was 10, 15 years ago. A lot of the issues that we're dealing with are around things like capacity, best interest, court of protection, need for rehousing. And so it isn't just around social care. So we've been able to submit that information to the Welsh Government. But I think also some of that is around the relationships with health and health's response to the way they manage people going into hospitals. I think there is still a tendency in the health board to bring people into hospital to be on the safe side, when in actual fact the safe side would be to get them out of hospital. And I think that we all know that once people are in hospital, then that person often, from an ability perspective, deteriorates, and therefore that makes it even more difficult for us to get them out than we would have done if we'd been able to turn them around at the front door, or even if we'd known about them before they went anywhere near the front door of the hospital. We've also been very closely looking at a recent project that we started called Home First. I don't know if anybody has heard of Home First, but that is where we have, as a region, put a team in at the front door of the hospitals, in both Neville Hall and the Royal Gwent. So an occupational therapist and a social worker is there 7 days a week. We were targeted to, across Gwent, not just in Monmouthshire. It's a real partnership piece of work. We were targeted to expedite 25 discharges a week. It had a very rocky start. It was a very different culture, very different way of working, but the figures of the last 2 or 3 months have consistently exceeded 30 discharges a week, and last week it was 42. So it's obviously something that's being very effective. I'm trying to think of anything else. Julie, have you got anything? Yeah.
Morning, everybody. Julie Boothroyd, Chief Officer. Sorry, I wasn't here earlier. The other bit I wanted to just mention, which I'm sure members will have seen, is the big red flag on adult safeguarding responses. We have, for some time now, been having some discussions about the pressures in that area as a result of the change in legislation. We have seen it's a positive, actually. It's a red flag, but it's actually a positive red flag, because the responsibility for people, it's known as a duty to report, concerns around safeguarding, has gone through the roof. Now, that's actually quite a good thing in some ways, because actually it means that the message is getting out about concerns that people may have about abuse. But obviously that creates much more pressure and demand at the front door. So we have, as a DMT, been looking at that in some detail, and have put forward a paper to a business case, really, to increase the capacity and the shape of that team at that first response in order to manage this going forward. That forms part of the discussions we'll be having later around the budget, but we do have a plan. So I'm hoping that in our subsequent performance reports, we will see that turn from red to hopefully amber to green. It's purely a demand-supply issue at the front door at the moment. So I just wanted to reference that. That's all right.
Thank you. Members, questions, points of clarification? Roger?
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at page 19 on the report, page 26 on the electronic bundle. You've got a couple of figures there, figure 2 and figure 3 on that particular page, but they're not mentioned in the text as far as I can see. There's measures mentioned, measures 20A, 20B, etc. But it's not clear to me exactly if they're measures or you understand what I'm saying. I wonder if you can clarify that for me, and particularly on figure 2, delayed transfers of care. You've got, if I've got it right, it looks like you've got final figures for 16-17, 17-18, 18-19, and then you've got a figure for 19-20 at quarter two. How does that? How can you fit a quarter two figure into a final figure graph, if you know what I mean? Because it looks like there's a massive decrease in delayed transfer of care. Is that in actual fact the case, or if we saw all quarter two figures for those years, would they be similar? In other words, I'm confused.
So we can help you clarify those points. So figure 2 is the component part of measure 19 around the rate of delayed transfers of care. So figure 2 gives you the actual numbers. I appreciate your point around the quarter 2 figure, which is why we tried to show it with the dotted line to reflect actually it is different from the 3 previous years, which are actual full year-end annual figures. As described in the text, we'd expect that to increase through the year, and the trend tends to be through the winter months that does increase. So I appreciate at this point in time, comparing against the annual year may make that curve look like a significant improvement, but you're right to raise actually through the year, and what we're projecting is probably a figure which may be similar to that shown in 2018-19. So we can clarify that in future. And in terms of figure 3, that shows of those 26 delays transfers of care for people aged 75 plus we've had so far this year, so between April and September 2019. The location of those delays. Yeah, sorry. I think we referred to figure 3. Maybe haven't quite made clear what figure 2 relates to, but hopefully the explanation below the graphs gives you the title for those.
Ah, yes, sir. I've just seen the figure 2 here. I beg your pardon. Yeah.
Okay. Is that okay?
Yeah, they are there. It's just me.
There we go.
Are you content with that, Councillor Harris? Are you content with that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
I have a question from Councillor Brown. And
yeah, I'm just going to the table below where it talks about delayed transfers of care, location of delays for social care reasons, and then it mentions that the community hospital, majority of delays are in the community hospitals. Now, in the explanation, it mentions about the brokerage of care hours as one of the reasons, but I'm just wondering whether or not the difference is that you've explained that this there's an occupational therapist, and I think you said somebody else assessing people as they come in say the Gwent, and there isn't possibly, I mean, are there discharge people based in the wards for the community hospitals, and do they have the same occupational therapy available to make sure that there aren't the same delay, because obviously there's quite a difference there. And I just wondered, I saw an article in the South Wales Argus, and it was about somebody who'd had a long delay to get out because of needing the care adaptations, and it was said there that the Gwent then had a team of ward discharge people to facilitate and make sure that that didn't happen. And I just wondered whether or not the community hospitals had the same sort of facilities that the larger hospitals have as well.
Shall I take that one? Yes, most definitely. I think the reasons for the higher level of detox in the community hospitals is because the majority of the people in the community hospitals will have come from one of the acute hospitals, and it is the most complex people that will be then transferred to a community hospital because they need more time, or they'll need more complex discharge planning for when they go home. In both of the sites, we have very robust teams, both of social work staff, occupational therapy staff and physiotherapy staff who work with those individuals on a daily basis to try and get them out of hospital. I think when we're talking, and they just going back to that, so in Chepstow Hospital there are more beds than there are in Monavale, so they have 2 occupational therapists working on that ward, and in Monavale there is predominantly 1. We do, however, operate a model of what we call in-reach, whereby if somebody is well known to a member of staff in the community, that person will also take a responsibility for their care. With regard to adaptations, the same protocol or process applies for things like safety at home and rapid response grants in the community hospital as they do in the acute hospital, or in fact for stopping somebody going into hospital. You know, we can often access a rapid adaptation on the same day to stop someone going into hospital as well as to bring them out. The only delays, if they were in a community bed and they needed an adaptation, was if it was a very complex adaptation. Even then, in as many cases as we possibly could, we would support somebody to go home and rearrange their environment or whatever so that it could get home whilst the adaptation was being done. Sometimes, obviously, that isn't possible. So on rare occasions, that would cause a delay. Or if, for whatever reason, their home can't be adapted and we have to look at alternative accommodation.
Any other questions from members? Okay. In summary then, I think members, we've noted the levels of delayed transfer of care and had an explanation, which is that, yes, there are potentially issues in the social care sector due to, crisis in the care sector. However, the delayed transfers of care are increasingly then perhaps caused by complexity for those people that we are seeing. So there is more complex to be able to get them home. And I think that's a pattern actually that we're seeing across the system. So both in acute hospitals and elsewhere, increased levels of complexity. The other point of note, which I certainly picked up, and thank you for the explanation, is the adult protection inquiries. We've had an explanation from the Chief Officer there about how that is a matter of demand not matching capacity at the front door, but that there are measures in place to be able to deal with that. Perhaps we could have a subsequent note following up on that matter to ensure that we are cited on improvements in that particular area, because that does, of course, put us in the bottom quartile for performance in that particular area. Similarly, I think the committee would want to continue to closely look at, patterns in delayed transfers of care, because whilst that can be a movable feast, when we put that up against our unbrokered hours of care, it does, I suppose, give us some cause for concern that is, an issue which is not going to get any easier to solve at the present time, anyway. Okay, thank you, members, and thank you for the detail of that report. We will now move on. So we've got two budget reporting matters. So we have item 6, which is the budget monitoring report for month 7. And then we will follow that with the scrutiny of the draft capital and revenue proposals. So not to confuse them, but again, if we can assume that members have read the report in detail, but if there are any points in particular on item 6 that you think warrant drawing our attention to, that would be really helpful. Ty, I'm guessing you're going to lead this item with support from Julie and Eve if there are service-specific matters. Thank you.
If I take you through the 2019-2020 month 7 forecast. If I draw your attention to, sorry, there's a bit of feedback on that. Sorry, I'm trying to keep it away from my mouth so much. If I take you to the recommendation section 2, and if I draw your attention more notably to 2.1, and that's the overall net forecast revenue outturn position at month 7 is a £3.99 million deficit, and 2.3 then is the capital upturn position, and that's slightly better, anticipating a £384,000 underspend. That's for the council as a whole. As I go through, I'll draw your attention then to the portfolio under the Adult Select Committee. If I take you to section 3 and 3.2, that gives you the holistic position of the month 7 revenue position for the council. And if I take you to the social care and health line, that's showing a month 7 we are forecasting a net overspend on our revenue budget of 3.634 million. The major driver of that is children's services, but for the Adult Select portfolio, of the £3.634 million overspend for adult services, that accounts, the overspend is £836,000. The main reason for the anticipated overspend in month 7 is the pressure throughout the year on the younger adults with disabilities budget. Mainly is a number of reasons. The main ones are due to an ageing carer population, which has seen an increased demand for placements. Is a greater move towards independency, which is a good thing, and with that brings a demand for residential, college and supported living placements. 3.4 gives you a flavour of the comparison through other years on relative performance, and 3.5 gives a bit of a dialogue on what kind of action we are looking at the council to try and mitigate the £3.99 million overspend this year. I'll come on to that into a bit more detail, because one of the things we are looking at is the use of capital receipts. If I draw your attention then to 3.7 and 3.8, that leads into the capital receipts, and what the council has got the ability to do within certain criteria is to use capital receipts to fund some specific revenue expenditure. So what we've done with officers, we've reviewed the month 7 position, looked at the capital receipts available to us through the capital programme to see what items we can use within the revenue spend to try and take some mitigation up to the £3.99 million overspend. 3.10 gives you a table on the kind of mitigation we're looking in terms of the deficit and the use of VAT receipts and the use of capitalisation to the tune of £2 million can hopefully try and reduce the month 7 overspend from a deficit to one of a surplus position, which is good. However, the use of capital receipts is only a one-off. It doesn't eradicate that pressure for future years. If I take you back up, sorry about jumping around, but if I take you back up to the table in 3.9, and under the social care heading, those are the 3 items we propose to use capital receipts for. It's £113,000 for joint local authority working, £50,000 on IT related costs, and then £183,000 as well towards work that we're doing on Turn the World Upside Down. As part of the budget setting process for 1920, we had savings mandates, and in 3.11, the table illustrates the amount of savings that were taken out of the 1920 budget. For social care and health, we had £1.246 million taken out of our budget. At month 7, we anticipate making £1.115 million worth of those savings, with £90,000 being delayed to next year, and £41,000 which we feel is unachievable. The £41,000 relates to children's services. The majority of the other savings do relate to the Adult Select portfolio. In terms of capital, which is section 4, we haven't got a large budget within the Adult Select portfolio. The budget mainly relates to the Crick Road development, and the £171,000 slippage will be rolled forward into next year for use for the Crick Road development. The reason for that is in the early years of a major capital development is mainly around fees for architects, planning, so on and so forth. We'll carry that money forward towards the main bill, which should start taking place next year. I'm happy to take any questions that you have. Thanks.
Members, open it up for questions to officers. Councillor Pavia.
Thanks, Tyrone, for taking us through that. I suppose the big concern around Crick Road and what potentially mitigating factors that can be put in to manage our risks, because it sounds like if it's not, a proportion of the project is not delivered by next financial year, then is it that we lose a huge amount of money? Is that right? Is that what it's saying in
You are right, Councillor.
Yeah.
We have got a large amount of money that we've secured from the Capital Intermediate Care Fund. It has got to be spent by the end of next year. We have got a project board in terms of Crick Road that is firmly on our site. With a capital scheme like this, you do invariably have delays. Some of them we have planned and tried to anticipate, but we are working on the majority of that ICF fund to be spent by the end of next year, and any underspend we will try and offset against the council budget, and then we can roll that forward into 21-22. That gives us the maximum flexibility. We can spend one pot, which is time limited, as you've rightly pointed out. The council fund, we've got a bit more flexibility in the use of that. Thanks.
Fine, thanks, Tyrone. That's helpful. In terms of other pressures, you know, and no disrespect to the chair, but I'm always amused when the Nine Bevan Health Board sort of pat themselves on the back as they're reducing CHC funding, when you know the pressure pops up somewhere else, and invariably it's on local government where our pockets are not as deep. It highlights that as a 140k pressure on CHC. Is that one particular case? Is that one issue? I don't know. I'm looking at Eve or Julie. There's.
I honestly don't know the answer to that question. There are ongoing problems with CHC from a variety of perspectives, and we are doing a piece of work locally and regionally with directors and with primary and community around how we resolve some of the issues that we have around the continuing healthcare process, particularly with people with learning disabilities.
Is it, just to come back on that, is there an issue of the health board reneging on commitments, or is it more complex about that? You know, particularly in terms of Section 33 or what is Part 9, you know, is that not being advanced enough?
I think it is very complex. I think that a lot of the issues are around the actual process and the difficulties that we're having getting situations or cases even to a decision point. And when we do, there's a constant request for more information, etc. So that ends up a very lengthy process, sometimes going into months where we're not having any decisions. And then I think there is a different perspective around some of the legalities under the framework of CHC, which we are doing some really serious unpicking with at the moment. I don't know if you want to add to that, Julie.
The only bit I was going to add to was when you referenced Section 33 and Part 9 of the Act and the ability to pool. One of the challenges that Eve is talking about is we've got a major issue specifically in learning disability. So if you take the Health Board as a whole, they are applying the CHC framework across the whole of the adult population. And in some areas, we're doing okay. But then in learning disability, we're not. So I've met with the Chief Operating Officer and the Director of that division to say, how can this be? How can we have access, not always 100%, but certainly better access in some areas, but no access here? And one of the conversations that we've had, it's been a sort of ambition of ours really, is why can't we just, in a sense, park the money or pool the money and have a different conversation around the people so that we're not fighting about the money and that in effect we would pool money. Now that would mean we'd have to pool money too, so it's all of us would have to get into that space. There's a real commitment to look at this. I think it is complex, and I think there's going to be quite a lot of layers to get through from a legal perspective about how would you do that when you've got health money that's free at the point of delivery and our money that's charged for. So how would you create an infrastructure and a pool of money? Would it be free? So I think there's a lot of complexity, but I think there is definitely some willingness to look at how could we crack it specifically for learning disability to start with, which is where we've got all the pressure really. One of the conversations that we were having was an independent facilitated discussion in the early part of this year. It's gone a little bit quiet actually. I'm going to prod again to start that off. So I think there is some impetus around this definitely, and we're never going to not push. So.
Sorry, Chair, just begging your indulgence. So you're saying that culturally it is changing. I know we've had some successes on certain areas, but we're 6 years down from the Act now, or we're only 2 years from a Healthier Wales, but there still seems to be a reluctance from the Health Board to engage on a number of these things, and walking away from various things because it doesn't seem to be getting its own way. When the driver there for integrated care has been down for some years now, and my feeling from with another hat on is that it's still that culture is still not changing. It's still not changing.
We have to be on it. We have to be on it. And I think as part of both, Eve sits on what's called the Gwent Adult Safeguarding Board. I sit on the leadership group. We sit, myself and Penny sit as part of the RPB, the Regional Partnership Board. The whole issue around integration, whatever you see that as being, this is a very, very hot topic. Has it changed culturally? A little bit, long way to go. But I think there is an appetite to work on some of these projects that I think would shift that culture much, much further. But we do have to keep prodding, definitely. But we won't give up prodding.
Can I just add, I think also there's a huge appetite to approach this from a regional perspective. I think we've all been individually sort of, looking at, individual cases, etc. And I think from a Gwent-wide perspective, we've all sort of gone, okay, we really need to have some conversations. And I think that has created a little bit of a shift in thinking, as in, okay, we really do need to sit down and talk about this.
It won't surprise Councillor Bouvier to know that I think everybody's minded in the same way. But I think there is absolutely quite a long way to go. But those discussions are, I would say, just getting off the starting blocks. But I think realistically, there are lots of elements of health and social care that need to have that discussion where everybody is taking a different approach and agreeing that there's a different kind of leadership and different kind of governance required. But we will. Absolutely, it's all public money. Quite right, Councillor. Yes. Yeah. Just make sure you use your microphone when you. Sorry.
I was going to ask about the process of the Crick Road development, and obviously Councillor Pavelly's got quite an understanding of the finance side that perhaps the rest of the committee like me haven't got. Is any of this going to affect the actual progress of this Crick Road development in terms of you know, the facility there?
In terms of Crick Road, I think that the development has gone before Adult Select in a paper, so we should be cited on it. It is a capital scheme rather than revenue, and it's replacing our existing facility, which is currently in called Senview. We've got a scheme. Like I say, invariably, when you have a large capital scheme like this, you do have certain delays, planning, so on and so forth. We have got a plan, is in place, as I answered Councillor Pavia's question, we will spend a large chunk of external funding that we've got through the ICF scheme first to make sure we max up that time limited budget. The rest then will dip into the council capital budget. So at this moment, even though we have got delays, is when we are cited on, we don't see them as a major problem that we do need to report back.
And just
so yeah.
Just as an additional question, does in terms of, you know, starting the project, in terms of the length of any contribution, does the spade in the ground count like it does on planning?
It's trying to take away from the spade in the ground is an arbitrary thing. What we've got to do, there are certain requirements around ICF that allows us to draw down money. It just doesn't relate to a spade in the ground. In terms of the criteria we've got to meet, we don't foresee that being any problem where we can max up that funding by this time next year, so we don't think we'll lose any funding and present any great risk to the authority. However, there is a risk with any capital scheme.
Sorry, managers, it's awkward. I don't like this either.
That's okay.
Don't talk to us. Talking to
being from the valleys, I usually got to
Yeah.
Anyway,
we understand.
sorry. So I'm not. There is a risk with any capital scheme, but there's one we are firmly cited on. Should we detract away from that greatly, we will report that back at our next earliest opportunity.
So I'm gaining the impression that some of the resources are from health as well as social services. Is that right?
Yeah, they are from health, but health is just the administering body. Welsh Government give money to health and social care through the Intermediate Care Fund. The host or the person who holds the purse for that is health. We bid for money and then we draw the money down from health. So they just merely like a banker in mere wages for facilitating the money between Welsh Government and health and social care. Even their own schemes, they've got their own board that they have to report to as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry about that type. But it's just that if you don't speak into the microphone, unfortunately, the live stream doesn't pick it up. And I know it's awkward because I feel it's awkward when you're talking to people that you've got their backs to you. It's not ideal in my view. Are there any other questions on the month 7 report, or shall I kind of summarise some of the key points, members? Councillor Pavia?
Sorry, just to come back again, and just on what Eve said about regional working. We've obviously got some pressures around commissioning with staff vacancies. Is any work? I mean, we're doing in the Economy and Development Select Committee a big piece of work, which is across the authority on commissioning procurement. Is there any regional working going on in terms of that wider commissioning piece, just to give authorities capacity, really? I'm just trying to.
Yeah, we've been doing some regional work with the transformation team, particularly around some of the problems that we're having with recruitment in the care sector. So there's been some ICF money again allocated on a regional basis, and a lot of that is around, you know, incentives to bring people in, training, help with registration, etc., etc. So, and I mean, some of those things are issues for some of the other boroughs, but it's not quite as stark as it is in Monmouthshire, really, for a whole host of reasons, which most of us are familiar with. And so we have been specifically allocated some of that money to try and incentivise, and we also had some winter pressures money to try and sort of get us over the difficulties that we've got in winter. So they've got some shorter and they've got some longer term work that they're looking at around that. And of course we're working very closely with Social Care Wales through, you know, things like the Dare to Care campaign, etc. As for other areas of recruitment, that's the biggest problem area we have. Touchwood, other disciplines, we haven't really had any issues in Monmouthshire. I do know that some of the other areas in particular have had problems recruiting occupational therapists, which is obviously creating them some significant problems around, you know, length of stay, detox, and also, you know, their ability to re-able, and they haven't been able to recruit, but there's also a national shortage of occupational therapists. So at this moment in time, we're quite fortunate, and it's the care sector that's our biggest problem. Does that answer the question?
I think, to be fair, we had a very good debate about the, you know, that position in terms of recruitment and so forth in our last committee. So in terms of the questions you've had, I think it's probably quite important for us to note the pressures that there are on adult social care and health budget in particular. We've noted a 3.64 million pressure on that particular area of the budget. I think the concern, and that's being dealt with in part by one-off grants, but also by potentially capitalising, I'm not sure what the word is, use of capital receipts, which again are one-off. So am I right in thinking that we have an underlying deficit already that we are trying to address, but that is still existing? And I think one of the things that I note, and we'll come on to this a little further in the budget setting, but we have, I think the last figure I saw, I know it changes obviously hourly, as Eve said, but 970 hours of unbrokered care I read in one of the reports. And so I was thinking, if we have this underlying deficit and we were able to broker that care, you know, let's say by some miracle of miracles there were carers available to do those tasks, what would our budget look like then, members? And so I just, you know, I know that this is slightly an intractable problem, but I think that we need to highlight it to the rest of the council. And I'm sure the cabinet member will be exercised about our position as anyone else, but I'm not sure. We don't have the answers, but I'm not sure how we go on trying to look at taking money out of our budgets when we have these intractable pressures on us. Making those conversations with health is more important, one would think. Am I right in just come out and then I can summarise?
I can help you with that. In terms of your question, yes, we have got underlying pressures and issues, and we can sort of quantify that when I move into the revenue MTFP for next year, because some of our pressures are some of the issues that are prevalent in the month 7.
So to summarise, the month 7 report then committee notes the pressures that there are on adult health and social care budgets, and is demonstrates some level of concern about what this means in terms of the underlying financial pressures that the council is monitoring. And I do note, I think it was the last time the budget was presented, we were advised that it moved from quarterly to monthly monitoring of the budgets. But I have to say, I can't necessarily see that that's made a great deal of difference, but it would be helpful to know whether officers felt that it had. Thank you.
my point of view, what it does give that monthly insight to senior management exactly what the pressures are. Okay. It's hard to do something about a pressure unless it's a shortage of money, and all of a sudden we get a windfall. But it does highlight sooner rather than waiting until say year end, and then me coming along and saying, oh, by the way, you were overspending by 4 million. How can senior management do anything about it or consider that if you tell them after the event? So the monthly one does give them insight at the very earliest opportunity exactly how they're spending and what the cause and effects are and whether anything can be done about it. Sometimes, unless we have that magical windfall, or I decide to bet all of the council's money on black and it comes up, it's hard sometimes for senior managers to try and change that direction of travel, but at least then it does give them an early insight. So people like Julie can speak to the cabinet member involved, so they are foresighted rather than being a surprise when it's after the event.
Thank you. I think really helpful, because what we're seeing, we're being asked to, in the recommendations, to note the 3.99 deficit and to assess effectively whether our budget monitoring processes are effective. And I think what we're hearing is that officers are doing what they can to monitor the budgets, but because the pressures are such, it's very difficult to have any impact on those month to month because of the pressures which are the nature of the service, one would imagine, quite difficult. So it's not necessarily a matter of budgets not being well managed, but that we have these consistent pressures on the system. That would seem to be the issue, members. Are you content with that as a summary of where we are? Okay, thank you. Right, we will now move on. Oh, I don't know, I turned that off. To item 7, which is the scrutiny of the draft capital and revenue proposals for 2021 within the medium-term financial plan. So you have in your packs the information that went to Cabinet on the 20th of December, which includes individual budget mandates and equality impact assessments and a cumulative equality assessment for the proposals. Tyrone has suggested that we just move into questions. I mean, we've all had I mean, I don't know. I mean, if you've seen this and looked at it, we will be debating it at council. But I think it's really important that the select committee has an opportunity to look at the pressures and the potential savings mandates that are contained within the adult select portfolio area. So unless you've got anything you wanted to add, Tyrone, would you, members, I shall open it up to members' questions.
Can give you a brief overview. The budget set is no different to any other year. We start with our baseline budget. We look at what pressures have come through, either what officers would like to do in the forthcoming year or pressures that are exhibiting in current year. Some of those we talk about month 7. Then we look at the settlement or the draft settlement that we think we're going to get, council tax setting, and invariably there's a difference there that we try and bridge with savings, try and peg back those pressures, or we have to change our council tax strategy. Nothing's changed this year in terms of the adult select portfolio. I'll just show you to some of the headline figures. We've got on the table £5.5 million worth of pressures. That's the additional budget we would like next year. That's to cover some of the issues that I've shown in the month 7. There's also one question you asked as well, Chair, around the unmet need and those hours, and if we did have the carers, that's a factor of that £5.5 million pressure. And then we've brought to the table £1 million worth of savings to try and offset some of those pressures. And that's in a mix. That's the main themes in terms of the revenue budget for next year. In terms of the capital, we're not a real big player in the capital budget. our capital budget is still around the Crick Road development and only that. So I hope that just helps you try and go to the main salient points and try and concentrate where your scrutiny lies in terms of the budget for next year, in terms of your portfolio.
Thank you. I don't know if you just want to, do members want Tyrone to have a quick run through some of the mandates that relate to this area, or do members feel cited? Yeah. Would you mind just quickly the main?
In terms of the £5.5 million worth of pressures, we've got just over £1 million pressure mandate for adults with disabilities. That is for the reasons that we brought out in the month 7, is due to the ageing carer population, the increased demand for places, especially with the move towards independence around residential college placements, supported living placements, and also the throughput from children to adults as they transition from being a child to one into the adult world. There's a £373,000 pressure for provider fee increases. That's tied into the recent announcement with the minimum wage going up by, I think it's 6.2%. And I took a snapshot of inflation in September at 1.7%. So I've tried to factor into what I think would be an overall increase that providers would want, or where we can start negotiating with those. Turn the world upside down. That's looking at how we provide our offer for domiciliary care provision, where we've tried to incorporate our current demand on services, and as the Chair rightly pointed out, those hours of unmet need. The pressure on that is £1.048 million extra we would require next year. We've got something called the MISS project. That's in children's services, but that's where we've got a multi-agency team looking at high-end care provision for children. That's £287,000 to increase that team support. We've got in-year pressures with children's services to the tune of £2.6 million. And then we put a proposal to boost our safeguarding team. I think Julie touched on some of those points in the performance report, and that is at a cost of £153,000. Those, I think, is half a dozen pressures, amount to £5.5 million. Offset against that, we've put a number of savings proposals together, totaling just over £1 million. If I quickly run you through those, £116,000 is where Welsh Government are proposing to increase the non-residential weekly charge cap from £90 a week to £100. That could give us an extra £116,000 worth of income, if my mathematics are correct. Looking at negotiating with health around our Section 28 provision at Seven View. That's basically where we offer beds for health usage, and we maybe be able to renegotiate that contract value up by a further £166,000. We've got savings within our legal provision for children's services of £100,000. The MISS team I just talked to you about, we're asking for an extra £287,000, but we think that can deliver savings of £250,000. Overall fees and charges within social care, we've reviewed our fees. That could get us an additional £189,000. The charges range from those means-tested services in adult services, which is residential care, non-residential care. It also includes public protection charges. Public protection comes under the Social Care Directorate, and those would be around food standards, licenses, petrol permits, taxi fees, so on and so forth. There's a couple of odds and sods, I call it, savings of 7, 20 and 15,000. That's mainly around efficiencies within our internal services that we provide. And then there's £150,000 for continuation of our practice change agenda. if that helps, just to run you through that.
Thank you. Members' questions? Louise?
Yeah, on that table that you were quoting just then, why has the ICF funding for the MIST project ceased? And could I have an explanation about that? Thank you. It's probably maybe for the director or Evie, I don't know.
I can answer. In terms of ICF, as I mentioned before, is a pot of money from Welsh Government given to health. They asked for bids. We put in a bid for a joint MIST team with Blaenau Gwent. That was time limited. The 18 months expires in 2021. From the studies, we feel is a very useful direction of travel, especially for those high need children, is a way where we can try and get them back to the community or deliver the care within the community on a multidisciplinary level. And for that reason, we want to then not only keep funding the team ourselves, but also try and expand the team for the use of Monmouthshire. We've gone through not only a robust review exercise, but we've identified cases as well where that team can target and make real change to the children. And also, as a side thing, is to provide the council with a financial saving of £250,000.
Other questions? Do you, Councillor Croker? Yeah, Councillor Croker.
Thank you, Chair. I accept this is a very important meeting this morning because it gives us, as the scrutiny committee, our only chance to look at specific elements that relate to adult provision within the budget. And rather than comment on specific things here, I'd like to just philosophically try and think outside the box for a little time, because I think the reality is that when we're talking about having to pay for adult services, the situation is likely to get worse year on year as the size of the difficulty grows, rather than being able to solve it. And I think that with all the best will in the world, Ty, you do a great job, but the scale of what we're looking at here in national provision means that as one very small local authority, we are tiny players in a huge problem. I note that the Prime Minister, before he gained that august position, acknowledged that adult social care was something that actually needs a national UK solution rather than a county council solution. But nonetheless, we are challenged with having to balance our books at a local level. So some comments that really are more to do with talking to the cabinet member behind me rather than to you in front of me, in terms of maybe looking as we go down the road as to how we as a small local authority might seek to make life a little bit easier and make our ability to deal with the provision for elderly people, in particular in Monmouthshire, more easy to bear. And I do note that under 4.3 in the report, the growing impact of the ageing population and adults with disabilities on our adult social services. I think, and it's great our senior officers are here from adult care, I think we've got some excellent senior officers who are very good at thinking outside the box. And I think turning the world upside down as an initiative is a really good example of that. Trying to look at different ways in which we can work as a local authority with care providers. Really so that everybody's best interests are taken into account and we get the maximum level of flexible working. We're looking here at medium term moving forward, maybe even something for the long term as well. When I first joined local authorities as a senior officer back in the 1980s, in social services, as it used to be called, and in education, we provided many of our own staff to provide the sort of care that we are now looking to commercial companies to provide. We see exactly the same thing in terms of housing, where local authorities at one time would have provided thousands of their own houses and now are looking to commercial providers to fill that niche. I think that as a local authority, we need to put pressure on central government, and wherever we can, we need to act ourselves to train up our own people and remove, if you like, the middleman who is there and needs to make a profit. And let's be quite clear, where a private company is concerned, they can come and go at their own volition. And I just quote a few words from the report that you presented to us. Over the past year, we have seen a decrease in the capacity providers have, an increase in the number of people waiting for care at home services, and a number of national providers have pulled out. Now, this seems to be almost the preparation for a perfect storm. I would like us to be able to move, and I think there may be legal problems somewhere down the line here, so I'm talking about a philosophical shift, if you like. But as a county, I think we should be moving to a position where we once again have our own large-scale training services able to train domiciliary workers, to remove that middleman. Let us as a county work to not only have the great philosophies at a senior management level, which we have got, but actually then to deliver that on people's doorsteps. And beyond that, and this is for the Welsh government rather than for a national government, when I worked as a senior officer in local authorities, there were 6 heads of social services. There are now 22. There were 6 senior leadership teams in social services. There are now 22, all of whom have to be paid. And I really do regret that the Welsh government bottled out of looking at local government reform, because there are huge economies of scale. And I hope that our own people here, wherever they can, and I see it happening in all sorts of ways, but as we move forward, wherever we can, looking to collaborate with our neighbouring authorities to give us more of that economy of scale, and not only to improve services, but potentially to offer them at a cheaper level as well. And so I'm not coming with any solutions. I'm not bright enough to do that. And I'm not criticising, I'm praising what we do here. But at the end of the day, it's like the boy with his finger in the dike. I think we need to start providing our own services. Excuse me. Need to provide our own services, but we also need to pressure national and Welsh governments to try to give our people a better chance at meeting a huge and growing problem. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Grocott. I've got Councillor Murphy, Julie and Councillor Edwards.
Thank you, Chair. I can sum most of that up quite easily. Councillor Grocott's absolutely right in his aspirations. We've all got those. But this is a devolved situation. It is wholly funded through Welsh Government and council tax and anywhere else we can get it from. But the position is that unless additional funding comes, and I don't care where it comes from, I don't care how it comes out of Cardiff Bay, they can give it to health, and health can help us to fund it, or they can give it to us and we can help to stop the problems landing up in health. But of the recent consequential that went to Welsh Government of some 600 million, Only 188 came out to local government. As everybody's aware, we only got a 3% increase. The bottom of the pile yet again, and I know I keep going on about that, but that is the principal problem. You know, Newport got 5.4. If we got the Welsh average, we'd have another £35 million. We wouldn't be having these conversations. So somehow that money and the rest of that 600 million has been spent. It's all gone. Most of it's gone to NHS. But until they wake up down there and they realise that local authorities are the key to solving an awful lot of these problems, we won't get the funding that will enable us to do what Councillor Grocott wants us to do. Because as I said when I started off, we'd all love to do that.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's really interesting, as Councillor Grocott points out, that this is a massive problem and it is a nationwide problem. I think just on the comment around the, if you like, the internalising or growing your own, I think it's fair to say that we've got a mixed economy. And recently, myself and Eve and our lead commissioner were invited to be part of a conference call around a topic of conversation that's going on from a Welsh Government perspective called rebalancing of care. And I think there is an appetite, certainly in Welsh Government, to look at, can this solve the problem? Could growing more of our own and, in effect, internalising the market solve the problem? Now, we had I think a very interesting conversation about this, because I think we had a very different position to a lot of local authorities. And partly that relates to the work and the relationships that we've developed with our providers and how we're trying to sustain a sort of economy of care that isn't just us. Now, from a financial point of view, if somebody was going to give us a load of money and say, bring it all in, would we still want to do it? Question mark. I think we'd need to really unpick that ourselves. One of the wider issues is that we can't get staff. And so the independent sector can't get them. We struggle too. So from a domiciliary care, home care perspective, even on our terms and conditions, which are higher than the market, and we're trying to equalise that through the Turn in the World piece of work, we're still struggling. We're still having to put an awful lot of effort into creative recruitment campaigns. I mean, you know, there are people having coffee mornings today everywhere, trying to entice people to come in from a Monmouthshire perspective, to come and work in care. Some of the work that Eve's been doing around the using money to incentivise. So, for example, £2,000 can help you set up, get a car, potentially put a bond down on a rented property, because, of course, property is expensive in Monmouthshire and rentals are expensive. All of these things are in train, if you like, to try and just keep us moving forward. If we had a massive injection of cash, would we suddenly be able to change that dynamic? Question mark. Don't know. But I think the efforts that we're trying to do, and I thank you for saying that, you know, the creative, because it is very creative, we're having to be very creative, and it links to what Councillor Murphy was saying as well. Bottom of the pile, never had any money, you know, we've never had the money, so we've always had to be really creative. And actually that's a positive. You know, I'm pleased in some ways. Feels weird to be saying you're pleased about not having money, but you know, we have had to be very inventive. But I think that whole rebalancing of care, it'll be very interesting, and that report's due to come out soon. It'd be interesting to see what the picture is across Wales about that debate. And I know that Welsh Government have asked a couple of authorities to potentially pilot that. And our near neighbour, I think Torfaen, are going to be one of them. So it'll be just very interesting if you try and suck all that back in. One, how much does it cost? And do you go further to solving this problem? So I just give you those comments back, really, Councillor Grocott.
Thank you, and I can only praise the officers. You know, they're always very, very good, give us a lot of good information. But I think the bottom line usually is resources, but also our expectations today are so much higher than what they were 30 or 40 years ago. Family makeup isn't the same. They don't care for their own, so to speak. But when you're saying about recruiting, and I've heard it from lots of people who want to go into nursing, that they have to have all these O-levels or A-levels and they don't learn on the job. And I always think a good nurse is born. You can't make them. They're always born to do that sort of role. And today it's acceptable to have male and female nurses, whereas 30, 40 years ago, it would be really frowned on if you were in a ward of women and you had a male nurse. But, you know, do we do enough to make it easier then for us to recruit the youngsters, or even bring nurses back in that have left, you know, due to childcare or whatever? And I think perhaps we should look at it broadly of what we're expecting from the people that we need to do this very worthwhile and satisfying job for an awful lot of people.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Before I know that Councillor Murphy has to leave, and I think it is really difficult to look at this budget and to identify areas that we, you know, I think we have to note our significant concerns about the underfunding of adult social care. I think that it would be remiss of us if we didn't. I think we have to note that you know, our staff and the leadership are trying to be creative, but we're working in a situation where actually it's almost so that we have this issue, and as Julie said, would we do that even if we had the money? But also, members, there is something about this as an economic issue. We can't recruit people even where we have better terms and conditions in the authority. Is there something about, you know, as you say, an even bigger issue where we need to value people for doing that kind of work and pay them accordingly? And that would need an even more significant financial rebalancing if we were to do that. Because whichever way you look at it is certainly an awful lot cheaper than, or more cost effective than, if you like, than having very high care, you know, health-based care when it's actually potentially a social care matter. But that's what we're left with. I think the only point that I wanted to make, I noticed the increase in fees, and many of those actually relate to public protection. But in terms of community meals, we're talking about maintaining that particular, freezing that. So it's pleasing to see that there isn't an increase. However, I do know that as a result of the increase, you know, we've talked before here, members, about some people not continuing to receive community meals. We've been reassured that that's not because of the pricing, but I did go out with the community meals service during Community Meals Week, and it was, you know, excellent and enlightening. But it did, you know, when you talk to the staff, you know, you do wonder whether, even if it isn't overtly the cost that's put people off continuing to receive that service, whether it is certainly something that we want to monitor. But I'm pleased to see that there is no increase in that cost at the present time. But I think otherwise it's very difficult for us to, you know, we don't have a magic solution to suggest to you as the Cabinet member. But I think we note those factors, and we note that there is very high level of budget monitoring happening in this area, and we would welcome, I mean, I don't know whether we should ask that the Cabinet member does explore whether there are any further, you know, that we do highlight our concerns to Welsh Government further, because we're only really heading for what would appear to be an even more significant crisis in our social care provision in the longer term.
Just to, I really do have to go now. I've got to be in Torfaen chairing the meeting. We've said this many times. We are constantly on to Welsh Government. Only yesterday, we questioned officials there, and you know, they're just not interested. They really are not interested in helping at all. The chances of us getting any more funding are, as well, you can basically write them off, I think. But I still remain optimistic. There's still a couple of weeks to go, and they may well change their mind. So let's hope.
Well, thank you very much for your attendance, Councillor Murphy, and we are optimistic too. But we note that you are already exercising every avenue to raise this issue with Welsh Government, and thank you for that. Thank you.
The only other thing I would add to that, because the funding formula disadvantages Monmouthshire the most, whenever there's any new initiatives for which Welsh Government then say, oh, we're funding local authorities, because it goes through that same distribution formula. We always end up losing out on that as well, and their mainstream budgets have to pick up the shortfall. One example is where the capital threshold limit is increased, and that's great for people, it's great for your constituent members, they can keep more money when they go into residential care. Welsh Government give a pot of money, it goes through the distribution formula, and then we don't get fully funded from it. That then leaves officers like Julie and Eve to try and free up existing resources that are already being stretched to try and fund that. It's just a perpetual thing as well. I just wanted just to add.
Thank you very much and that's really helpful to take us through the budget in that way. I think that gives members, well, no comfort really, but some comfort that we are doing everything we can.
I want to ask, as a comfort, I'm sure you don't want me to bet all the money on black then?
No,
Okay.
I mean, if you were going to do that, Tyrone, I think it would have to be slightly more mixed. But, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I've been here 16 years and it's the same old thing. We're down the bottom of the pile on funding, etc. The formula's all wrong. Why has it not been changed? Why? We had the Cabinet member here saying that all our woes are down to the Welsh Government. Absolutely no mention whatsoever since 2010 with the austerity put in by the National Government coalition.
Councillor
We
Harris.
cannot just hide from that all the time. Keep blaming the Welsh Government is ridiculous.
Councillor Harris, I don't think that's what we were saying, to be fair. I think what we were saying is that at the present time we are being advised that there's no further money and the funding formula is as it is. And not by design, I think, but because, you know, the way things are, the current formula disadvantages the way that Monmouthshire is. But I don't want to get into any political discussions here because that's not our purpose. So
It's important to point things out. Thank you, Chair.
I'm just going to. So we've summed up. We have a budget which we are not really content with, but we are doing the very best we can with it. And so thank you for the officers' input into that item. I think that's really helpful. So that takes us to a couple of our final items, members. So item 8, to confirm the minutes. We had a meeting, gosh, quite some time ago now, since September. Thank you very much, Tyrone. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Of the Joint Adult and Children Young People Select Committee on the 5th of September. And I'm just looking for them. Sorry, I have to take my glasses off now. That's one of the consequences of... I've got to find them now. Excuse me, 1 minute. I haven't got it on printed copy. So I'm just going to take you through them quickly, members, if there are any matters of accuracy when I can find them.
Chair.
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Revere, have you got... I can't find them. Have
Yeah.
you got an item of accuracy?
Yeah, just a similar one to Councillor Grocott flagged up for the other set of minutes. I did tender my apologies for that meeting. If they could be just noted, please.
At item 8.2, we've already agreed the minutes of the Adult Select Committee on the 5th of November. Can I just briefly draw your attention to item 9, which is the Adult Select Committee Forward Work Programme. I think that's really just for noting. And also, in the minutes on the 5th of November, we did agree that in 6 months we would ask for an update on the domiciliary care. Very timely given our conversation. And so I'm proposing that we add that to the April meeting, which would be potentially our last meeting in this civic year. We could, of course, have a meeting potentially in early May, but I'm wanting to avoid adding any additional meetings if possible. So with your indulgence, we will be asking officers to bring us an update in April. Are you content with that, members? Thank you, because if okay, are there any questions or queries for the scrutiny officers around the forward work programme that we have there? you'll see next time we're bringing forward the Gypsy Traveller Assessment, which is now, as far as I understand it, complete. No, oh, sorry, Chris.
This might be a really stupid question, and if it is, I apologise in advance. Right, on the Monmouthshire Scrutiny Forward Work Programme 2020-2021, under the meeting date of the 10th of March 2020, there's a list of things that are proposed to be on the agenda, but one item to be confirmed is mental health services. I wonder, as that's an area that I am particularly interested in, whether it could be confirmed sooner or later if it's going to be on that agenda, because I will absolutely make sure that I'm available.
Yeah, it's probably not that clear, but underneath the 10th of March, where it says meeting date 10th of March, then there's a box with TBC to be confirmed. That is because that would be a meeting that we'd need to set a date for. So it's not going to be tabled to the 10th of March, but we feel that that would be an issue that we ought to scrutinise jointly with Children and Young People Select Committee. It's cross-cutting, and I think we would hold a one-off meeting to look at that and have a single item agenda. So when we get a date for that, Children and Young People Select Committee have got to agree with this at their next meeting, which is later this month, and then we'll look to set up a date for that, possibly around March time. But yes, we would want you to be there, and we'll notify everybody when we've got a date. Okay.
Thank you, members. If there are no further comments, then item 10, Council and Cabinet Forward Work Planner for noting, and also if you have any particular matters to raise. No matters to raise. Okay, thank you. In that case, our next meeting will be on the 10th of March at 10 o'clock. I always think it's strange to read 2020. It seems like that's always a long way away. But anyway, thank you, members. Thank you for your attendance, and thank you very much for your participation. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.